Baseball is supposed to be America's pastime, a sport rooted in nostalgia, backyard memories, and the legends we grew up idolizing. But what happens when those same legends, those icons we plastered on posters and mimicked in the sandlots, suddenly become symbols of scandal, betrayal, or disgrace? What happens when their story shifts from highlight reels to courtroom transcripts, from home run celebrations to tearful apologies? Well, we realize that greatness on the field does not always translate to greatness off it. That sometimes the very athletes who redefine the game also redefine controversy. And maybe that's why this story matters, because controversy in baseball isn't just about broken rules or bad behavior. It's about trust, about how much a fan base is willing to forgive, about how much talent is worth compared to how much character can redeem or destroy a career. So today we're diving into the players who did more than just play the game. They rattled it, bent it, and sometimes nearly broke it. From record breakers tainted by steroids, to prodigies who burned out in a storm of scandal, to fiery personalities whose tempers became bigger headlines than their stats. Each of these players holds a mirror up to the sport itself, forcing us to ask hard questions. Is baseball really about numbers alone? Or do the stories behind those numbers matter more than we're willing to admit? And maybe the most unsettling truth is this: sometimes the villains of the game are just as unforgettable as its heroes, and sometimes they're even the same person. So buckle up, because we're not just explaining controversial MLB players. We're unraveling the cultural storms they created, the ripple effects on fans, franchises, and the future of the sport. And by the end, you might not just see these names differently, you might see the game itself differently too. Trevor Bauer's story is one of the clearest examples of how fast the line between hero and pariah can shift in Major League Baseball, because in 2020 he wasn't just good, he was dominant. A Cy Young winner at the peak of his craft, a quirky pitcher who mixed science with swagger, someone who prided himself on reinventing how pitching was studied with spin rates, high-speed cameras, and a relentless obsession with analytics. He wasn't afraid to call out opponents, trash talk on social media, or challenge old-school traditions. And for a while that made him refreshing, like a disruptor in a sport that often feels stuck in nostalgia. But then the headlines changed, not about his strikeouts or his record contract with the Dodgers, but about allegations that pulled his name out of the sports pages and into the legal system. In June 2021, a woman accused him of violent assault, and soon after, more accusations surfaced. Suddenly, the game wasn't about baseball anymore. It was about consent, violence, and how the league would respond to behavior off the field. Prosecutors declined criminal charges, but MLB took its own stand, handing him the longest non-lifetime suspension in its domestic violence policy, 324 games. A number that sent a message bigger than Bauer himself, a message that baseball was, at least in theory, ready to take off-field conduct seriously. But here's the thing: punishment didn't erase division. Some fans said the league overreached, others said it didn't go nearly far enough, and the Dodgers, who had gambled on him with one of the richest contracts ever for a pitcher, cut ties in 2023. And just like that, the player, who once seemed like the future of pitching innovation, was radioactive, left to rebuild a career in Japan and Mexico, where his talent still drew crowds, but his baggage followed everywhere. And this is where we ask the bigger question: what does it mean for a league to punish but not banish? What does it mean when Bauer is technically eligible to return, but no team dares touch him? Is it justice? Is it fear? Or is it simply a reminder that some controversies are too heavy for any clubhouse to carry? Because when you sign a player, you're not just signing his stats, you're signing his shadow. And Bauer's shadow has grown bigger than his era ever did. Maybe that's the lesson in baseball. Raw talent can carry you far, but once public trust is broken, sometimes there's no mountain big enough to stand on. Manny Machado's career is a reminder that talent and controversy often travel together, because since his 2012 debut with the Orioles, he has been nothing short of electric. A defensive wizard at third base and later at shortstop, a hitter with power and flair, and someone who carried himself like a superstar long before his numbers cemented that title. Yet the word that has followed him for years hasn't been genius or leader, it's been dirty. And that's because Machado has a history of plays that blurred the line between aggressive and malicious. In 2014, he tossed his bat toward third base in anger after being pitched inside, earning a suspension and a reputation for losing his temper. In 2017, he slid late into Dustin Pedroia's knee, a move that didn't just cause an injury, but arguably accelerated the end of Pedroia's career. And in the 2018 NLCS, he clipped Jesus Aguilar's ankle with what looked like a deliberate drag of his foot, a moment that had Brewers star Christian Yelich calling him, point blank, a dirty player. So how do we process that? Do we take it as proof that Machado was reckless, maybe selfish? Or do we recognize it as part of a long baseball debate over whether hard-nosed plays are grit or cheap shots? What makes Machado fascinating is that unlike some players who crumble under controversy, he kept producing, kept showing up, and eventually reshaped his image in San Diego, where his $300 million contract wasn't just about numbers, but about becoming the face of a franchise. In the years since, he's leaned into leadership, mentoring younger stars like Fernando Tatis Jr., avoiding the spotlight of scandal, and showing that reputations, even stained ones, can evolve, and maybe this is the point. Machado shows us that fans have long memories, but also selective ones. They'll remember the dirty plays, yes, but if you give them a decade of gold glove defense and all-star hitting, they might slowly let the narrative soften. He hasn't erased his past, but he's proven that controversy doesn't always define you forever. Sometimes it lingers, a whisper in the background, while your career keeps playing out loud. Barry Bonds is the perfect storm of greatness and controversy. Because if baseball were only about numbers, his case would be closed. 760 home runs, more than anyone else in the history of the game. 73 in a single season, 7 MVP awards, 14 All-Star selections, 8 Gold Gloves. He wasn't just good. He was on a level that seemed superhuman, the kind of player who could change the outcome of a game with one swing or force pitchers to intentionally walk him with the bases loaded. Yet instead of being celebrated as the game's purest slugger, Bonds became the face of baseball's steroid crisis, the central figure in the Balco scandal, the man whose pursuit of greatness was forever shadowed by whispers, and then outright accusations of performance-enhancing drugs. In 2007, he was indicted for perjury and obstruction of justice, accused of lying to a grand jury about knowingly using steroids. And while he insisted he thought he was only using flaxseed oil and arthritis cream, evidence tied him to designer steroids called the Clear and the Cream. So here's the contradiction. Bonds never actually failed an MLB drug test. Yet the evidence of his transformation, both physical and statistical, was so overwhelming that fans and writers never forgave. The Hall of Fame voters never forgave either, denying him entry across all 10 years of eligibility, never letting him cross the 75% threshold he needed, topping out around 66%, which means the man who might statistically be the greatest hitter to ever live is barred from Cooperstown, and this sparks the larger debate. Do numbers exist in a vacuum, or do they require context? Do we immortalize what happened on the field, regardless of how, or do we hold players accountable for the era they played in? Bonds isn't just a player. He's a test case for how much morality we expect out of athletes. Some argue it's hypocritical, that plenty of others juiced, but weren't nearly as scrutinized. Others argue that Bonds' arrogance, his refusal to ever admit wrongdoing, made him the perfect villain for a sport desperate for one. Maybe the truth is that Bonds is both. He's the hero who shattered records and the cautionary tale who shattered trust. And that's why he's still discussed, still debated. Because unlike a clean home run that clears the fence and leaves no doubt, Bonds' legacy lands in the seats with an asterisk, a question mark hanging in the air every time his name is spoken. Wander Franco was supposed to be the future of baseball, the kid every scout whispered about as if he were destined to be a Hall of Famer. before he even turned 20. Signed by the Tampa Bay Rays at just 16, rising through the minors with the kind of poise and talent that made people compare him to the greats before he had even laced up for a full season. By 2021, he was in the majors. By 2023, he had already been an all-star, and the Rays had locked him up with an 11-year, $182 million contract. An extraordinary show of faith for a franchise that rarely hands out money like that. He was the centerpiece of a small market team trying to prove it could keep its stars. And then the whispers started, not about his swing or his glove, but about his personal life. In August 2023, social media posts accused him of a relationship with a minor. And almost overnight, his story turned from a narrative of greatness to one of disgust. Within months, Dominican prosecutors formally charged him, alleging involvement with a 14-year-old girl, and the image of the smiling young superstar evaporated, replaced with mugshots, house arrest bracelets, and the chilling reminder that talent does not insulate someone from consequences. The Rays quickly distanced themselves. MLB placed him on the restricted list, and suddenly the boy who was supposed to define a generation of baseball might never step foot on a diamond again. So what do we make of this? Is it the ultimate cautionary tale of wasted potential? Or is it a deeper indictment of how fame at such a young age can distort judgment? Franco's case also forces fans to grapple with the uncomfortable truth that heroes can be villains in private. That rooting for someone's success sometimes blinds us to the possibility of darker realities. Even if legal outcomes still unfold, even if there are defenses raised, the damage to trust, to image, to his career trajectory feels almost irreversible. And maybe that's why his name hits harder than others on this list. Because unlike Barry Bonds, who had a long career before scandal consumed him, Franco's scandal devoured his career before it really began, and that is both shocking and sobering. Because it reminds us that baseball doesn't just lose games when players fall from grace. It loses futures, it loses what could have been, and sometimes that loss lingers longer than the scandal itself. Pete Rose is baseball's paradox in human form because if the sport is measured in records, consistency, and sheer obsession with winning, then he should be celebrated as one of the greatest to ever play. After all, this is the man who holds the all-time hits record with 4,156, a 17-time All-Star, 3-time World Series champion, the 1973 NL MVP, the embodiment of hustle and grit, the guy who earned the nickname Charlie Hustle because he sprinted to first base on a walk and played the game like every pitch could be his last. And yet, despite all of that, Rose's legacy is cemented not in Cooperstown, but on baseball's ineligible list. Because in 1989, the Dowd Report concluded that he had bet on baseball while managing the Cincinnati Reds, including betting on his own team, a revelation that cut to the heart of the game's credibility. Gambling isn't just a violation of rules, it's an existential threat to the integrity of results. It shakes the very foundation of whether fans can trust that what they're watching is real. So baseball's punishment was swift and brutal, a lifetime ban, a scarlet letter that would follow him to his grave, and for years Rose denied it, fought it, insisted he never bet against his own team, insisted it was all a misunderstanding. Until in the 2004 he finally admitted in his autobiography that yes, he had bet on baseball. Yes, he had crossed the one line the sports war could never be crossed. So here we have a man who gave everything to the game, but took from it something it could not forgive, and the debate rages on. Some argue his accomplishments deserve a Hall of Fame plaque, that his punishment has already lasted decades. Others argue the rules are the rules, and if you compromise on this, you compromise on the very integrity that makes the game worth watching. Rose himself once said he believed he'd only get into the Hall after I die, and in 2024 he did pass away, still locked out of Cooperstown, leaving the sport to wrestle with the uncomfortable possibility that its all-time hits leader will never be immortalized alongside the legends he surpassed. Maybe that's the real tragedy of Pete Rose, not just that he broke the rules, but that he showed us how fragile the balance between greatness and disgrace really is. How quickly one choice can cast a shadow so long that not even 4,156 hits can outrun it. Yordan Ventura was a paradox of promise and volatility, a pitcher who threw fire not just with his arm, but with his temperament. And in only 4 MLB seasons with the Kansas City Royals, he left a mark that felt larger than his years. His fastball routinely touched triple digits, electrifying a fan base that hadn't seen a true flamethrower like him in decades. And when he was on, when his command matched his stuff, he looked unhittable. The kind of arm that could anchor a franchise for a decade. And he proved it on the biggest stage by helping the Royals to their 2015 World Series title. Yet just as often the headlines about Ventura weren't about strikeouts or wins, they were about confrontations, because his temper burned just as hot as his heater. In 2015 alone, he sparked multiple bench-clearing incidents, jawing at Mike Trout, plunking Brett Lawrie in retaliation for a hard slide, igniting a 4-minute brawl after chirping at Adam Eaton. His reputation quickly became one of baseball's most volatile players, talented but combustible. And that raises the hard question. How do you balance fiery competitiveness with recklessness that risks your team's stability? Some Royals fans loved him for his fire. Others worried he'd never mature enough to harness it. But tragically, the answer was never fully written. Because in January 2017, Ventura died in a car accident in the Dominican Republic at just 25 years old. The news hit the baseball world like a gut punch, not just because of the loss of a young man, but because of the sense of what could have been. Would Ventura have matured into the ace his talent promised? Or would his volatility have always defined him? The truth is we'll never know. And that is what makes his story both controversial and heartbreaking. Because while some players ruin their legacies by their own choices, Ventura's was cut short before we ever saw the final chapter, leaving behind a memory that is forever incomplete. And maybe that incompleteness is its own kind of controversy, the haunting reminder that baseball careers, like lives, can vanish without warning, leaving only highlights and questions in their place. Jarring Duran's story isn't about a career brought down by scandal, so much as it is about how quickly public perception can turn. Because for the Boston Red Sox outfielder, 2024 was supposed to be his breakout year. He not only made his first All-Star team, but won the All-Star Game MVP by hitting a clutch 2-run homer, finishing the season with an impressive 285 average and an OPS plus of 130, proof that he wasn't just a role player, but a budding star. And yet when people talk about him now, it's not just about his swing or his speed. It's about the moments where his emotions got the better of him, most notably in the 2024 game against the Houston Astros, where he was caught on camera using a homophobic slur in response to a heckling fan. The league responded with a suspension. Duran responded with an apology. But apologies in the age of instant replay and viral clips don't erase what was said. They linger, shaping a reputation long after the games move on. And while some fans accepted it as a mistake made in the heat of competition, others saw it as evidence of immaturity, of a lack of discipline in the spotlight. And this is where the conversation about Duran becomes bigger than him, because baseball is no longer a sport where only the stats matter. In an age where microphones are everywhere and where players double as brand ambassadors, every word matters, every gesture matters, and controversy doesn't have to come in the form of criminal charges or league-wide scandals. Sometimes it's just a sentence spoken at the wrong time, one that shows how fragile the bond between player and fan can be. Duran may very well continue to grow, to learn, to let his bat and glove define him rather than his slip of the tongue. But the incident is a reminder that in today's baseball, character is scrutinized as closely as batting averages, and the difference between being a fan favorite and a polarizing figure can hinge on a single word. Chase Utley's career is the kind that should have been remembered purely for excellence, because he was the heartbeat of those late 2000s Philadelphia Phillies teams. A 6-time All-Star second baseman, a World Series champion in 2008, a player whose combination of power, defense, and baseball intelligence made him one of the most respected infielders of his era. With a career WAR of over 64, that puts him in legitimate Hall of Fame conversations, and yet ask most fans outside of Philadelphia what they remember about Utley, and chances are they'll bring up one play, October 2015, Game 2 of the NLCS, Dodgers vs. Mets. A late, reckless slide into Ruben Tejada at second base that snapped Tejada's fibula and set off a firestorm. And across the baseball world, Mets fans saw it as dirty. The Dodgers defended it as hard-nosed baseball. But the outrage was immediate and intense. Threats poured in. Security had to follow Utley for the rest of the series. And the league responded not just with a suspension, but with something even bigger. A change in the rules themselves, what became known as the Chase Utley rule, mandating that runners make a bona fide slide directly into the base rather than veering off course to break up a double play with contact. Utley, for better or worse, literally altered the way the game is played, and that's the strange duality of his legacy. He was both a brilliant player who anchored a championship team and a controversial figure who became the face of excessive aggression. So how do we judge that? On one hand, baseball has always romanticized toughness, the tight cob spikes high attitude, the idea that you play hard and you play to win. But on the other, Utley's slides show the cost of those traditions, that glory. For one player can mean career-ending injuries for another. In the end, Utley's legacy is complicated, admired in Philly as a hero, vilified in New York as reckless, but remembered everywhere as the man whose style of play forced baseball to finally draw a line, proving once again that controversy isn't always about breaking laws or rules. Sometimes it's about pushing them so far that the game itself has to evolve in response. Alex Rodriguez was supposed to be the golden boy of baseball, the clean successor to the home run crown, the superstar who had it all, 3 MVP awards, 14 All-Star selections, a 2009 World Series championship with the Yankees, and contracts so massive they reset the market not once but twice. But his story, like so many in this lineup of controversies, became less about what he did on the field and more about what he admitted off it. In 2009, he publicly confessed to using steroids during his time with the Texas Rangers, framing it as a mistake made under the crushing weight of a historic contract. And for a while it seemed like that might be the end of it, a tarnished but survivable footnote in a Hall of Fame career. But then came 2013 and the biogenesis scandal, a bombshell investigation that exposed Rodriguez as a client of an anti-aging clinic, supplying pets to multiple players, and unlike some who slipped under the radar, a Rod was front and center. MLB dropped the hammer with a 211-game suspension, the longest ever for use at the time, effectively wiping out his 2014 season. And for a while, it seemed his career might crumble under the weight of disgrace. But here's where the Rodriguez story twists in a way that makes him unique. Instead of fading into bitter exile like so many others caught in the steroid web, he leaned into reinvention, returning in 2015 to hit his 3,000th career hit, finishing with 696 home runs, and then transitioning almost seamlessly into broadcasting, where his charisma, insight, and surprising humility turned him into a media figure more popular than he had ever been as a player. The same man once jeered as a fraud now sits on primetime television breaking downswings and sharing stories, and even in business, he's carved out a respected second act. Yet his Hall of Fame case remains ice cold, voters refusing to forgive. His numbers undeniable, but his name inseparable from scandal. And maybe that's what makes Rodriguez so fascinating. He is living proof that while the Hall of Fame can deny you immortality, the court of public opinion can grant you something close to redemption. A Rod story isn't just about steroids, it's about the power of reinvention, about how one man can burn his legacy to the ground and then rebuild a new one in a different arena, not spotless, not universally loved, but respected in ways no one could have predicted when he was suspended in disgrace. And that duality makes him one of baseball's most complicated figures, a reminder that sometimes controversy doesn't In careers, it just forces them to take a very different shape. Albert Bell's story is one of those rare ones, where the numbers should have spoken louder than the noise, but the noise was deafening, because Bell was one of the most feared hitters of the 1990s, a five-time All-Star who remains the only player in MLB history to hit 50 home runs and 50 doubles in the same season. A man who could turn a pitcher's mistake into a screaming line drive faster than anyone in his era. But instead of being remembered as a Hall of Fame-level slugger, Bell is remembered as baseball's great hothead, a player whose relationship with fans, teammates, and the media was so volatile that it overshadowed his brilliance. He famously chased NBC reporter Hannah Storm out of the clubhouse, threw a ball into the stands that struck a heckling fan, and once had to rely on a teammate crawling through ceiling tiles to swap out his corked bat. During an investigation, his aggressive plays on the field masked his demeanor off it, from charging the mound after Neil Heaton to leveling Fernando Villa on a double play attempt, with a collision that looked more like football than baseball. And this is the tragedy of Albert Bell. His statistics, a .295 batting average, 381 home runs, and over 1,100 RBIs, are numbers that would normally guarantee years of Hall of Fame consideration. But instead, he fell off the ballot after just 2 tries, voters unwilling to separate the production from the persona. And maybe that's the lesson his career leaves behind, that baseball isn't just about numbers and highlight reels. It's about the way you fit into the larger story of the game, and Bell never quite fit. He fought with fans, fought with writers, fought with anyone who crossed him, and in doing so, he carved out a reputation that no amount of home runs could erase. But here's the uncomfortable truth. For every fan who despised his temper, there were others who loved that edge, who saw in Bell a player who refused to play nice for anyone, who was unapologetically himself in a sport that often demands conformity. And that's why his legacy is so complicated. Because you can look at his career and see a wasted Hall of Fame path, or you can see a man who refused to compromise even if it cost him immortality. Either way, Albert Bell remains unforgettable, a player who swung with power, but lived with fire, and left behind a name that still sparks debate decades later. John Rocker's career is proof that sometimes controversy doesn't just tarnish a career, it obliterates it. Because for a brief stretch, in the late 1990s, he was an effective closer for the Atlanta Braves, saving games with a fastball that touched the upper 90s and an intensity that seemed tailor-made for high-pressure ninth innings. But all of that was wiped away in December 1999 when he sat down with Sports Illustrated and let loose a tirade so filled with racism, homophobia, and xenophobia that it stunned not only baseball, but the broader public. Asked about the idea of playing in New York, Rocker launched into an unfiltered rant about immigrants, about gay people, about entire communities he didn't want to share space with, and just like that, he wasn't just a pitcher anymore. He was a lightning rod, the embodiment of every ugly stereotype fans and players alike wanted purged from the game. MLB suspended him, fined him, reduced the suspension on appeal, but the damage was irreversible. From that moment on, every stadium he stepped into was hostile, especially in New York, where fans greeted him with venom and boos louder than anything he had ever faced on the mound. His performance declined, his composure cracked, and within a few years he was out of the league. And here's where the Rocker story becomes a cautionary tale. Because baseball has always been a sport where rivalries, trash talk, and even bad tempers are tolerated, sometimes even celebrated. But there is a line, and Rocker obliterated it, proving that no amount of saves, no era, no big strikeouts can outweigh the toxicity of words that alienate entire groups of people. Some controversies are about bending rules, others about private mistakes made public. But Rocker's was about hate, pure and unvarnished. And once that was revealed, there was no path back. Not in baseball, not in the public eye. Maybe that's why his name lingers in conversations about infamy. Because he reminds us that athletes aren't just athletes, they're also voices. And when those voices broadcast intolerance on a national stage, The fallout can be louder than any fastball popping a glove. Jorge Lopez is the kind of player who, in another timeline, might never have made a list like this. A journeyman pitcher who bounced between roles, teams, and bullpens over the course of a decade, carving out a place in the majors through persistence, rather than dominance. But in the last few years, his name became less about his era and more about his outbursts. And in baseball, where image and locker room chemistry matter as much as performance, that can be a death sentence for a career. The most infamous moment came in 2024 when he was ejected for arguing with umpires, and afterward, in a raw post-game interview, he seemed to unleash frustration not just at the officials, but at his own team, referring to the Mets as the worst team in the whole effing MLB, words that spread across headlines within hours. Lopez later tried to clarify, saying he had meant to call himself the worst teammate in the league, rather than insult the entire franchise, but by then the damage was done. The Mets designated him for assignment almost immediately, sending a clear message that his presence was more of a liability than an asset, and the next year the pattern continued. In 2025, during a game against the Pirates, he intentionally threw at Andrew McCutchen, right after plunking Brian Reynolds, a move so blatant it sparked a bench's clearing, confrontation, and earned him a suspension and fine. These incidents reveal something important about controversy in baseball. It's not always about earth-shattering scandals or crimes that grab national headlines. Sometimes it's about small moments of poor judgment, words spoken without thought, pitches thrown without control, and for a player without superstar numbers to fall back on. Those missteps can define a career more than anything else. Jorge Lopez might not be remembered alongside Bonds or Rose, but in his own way he shows how fragile a baseball life can be, how quickly frustration can tip into self-destructs, and how in the unforgiving world of professional sports, where every word and action is amplified, one slip can cost you not just a game, but your place in the league. Rafael Devers is not the kind of name most fans expect to find in a conversation about controversy, because since debuting with the Red Sox in 2017, he has been one of the faces of consistency. A three-time All-Star, two-time Silver Slugger, a World Series champion, and in 2023 the centerpiece of Boston's future when the team committed to him with an 11-year, $331 million extension, the kind of contract that says, "You are our cornerstone." But what makes Devers controversial isn't what he's done off the field, it's what he's refused to do on it. Because in 2025, when the Red Sox signed Alex Bregman, another star third baseman, they found themselves with two franchise players for one position. And while Bregman was willing to move across the diamond to second base, Devers drew a line in the dirt, flatly refusing to give up third base. Management compromised by moving him to designated hitter, a move he publicly disagreed with. But the real tension came when first baseman Tristan Casas went down with an injury in May, and the team asked Devers to step in at first, a position many stars have shifted to later in their careers. Devers refused again, sparking a controversy not about talent, but about responsibility. Because this is the fundamental tension in baseball. Do you do what's best for yourself, protecting your comfort and your image, or do you do what's best for the team, even if it means sacrifice? Some teammates sided with him, saying stars earn the right to dictate where they play. Others grumbled that championships are built on flexibility and selflessness, and the fanbase split just as sharply. Devers' bat still makes him indispensable, but his unwillingness to bend has made him polarizing in a way his effortless swing never did. And maybe that's what makes his controversy important, because it forces us to consider what leadership looks like in modern baseball. Is it putting up numbers and letting others adjust around you? Or is it leading by example, taking on roles you don't love for the sake of the greater whole? Devers' story is still unfolding, but in a way it shows us that not all controversies have to involve scandal or disgrace. Sometimes they're about the subtle conflicts of pride, power, and the expectations that come with being paid like a franchise savior. And whether that clash ends with harmony, or fracture could very well define the next chapter of the Red Sox themselves. When we look back at these names, Trevor Bauer, Manny Machado, Barry Bonds, Wander Franco, Pete Rose, Yordano Ventura, Jarren Duran, Chase Utley, Alex Rodriguez, Albert Bell, John Rocker, Jorge Lopez, Rafael Devers, it's tempting to file them away as scandals, as cautionary tales, as proof that baseball is as messy and flawed as the people who play it. But the truth is deeper than that, because controversy in baseball isn't just about what a player did wrong. It's about what we as fans choose to remember, forgive, or condemn. Pete Rose showed us that numbers can't always redeem broken trust. Barry Bonds proved that records without credibility can become monuments with shadows. Wander Franco reminded us that promise means nothing without judgment. And Trevor Bauer demonstrated that talent alone cannot shield someone from consequences. Yet others like Manny Machado and Alex Rodriguez prove that reputations can evolve. That image is not fixed. That redemption, however partial, is possible if someone is willing to keep showing up. The controversies of Albert Bell and John Rocker remind us how personalities, words, and tempers can undo legacies faster than any slump, while cases like Jarren Duran and Jorge Lopez show us that even small missteps in today's hyper-connected world can echo louder than intended. And then you have Rafael Devers and Chase Utley, who force us to wrestle with subtler questions of ego, aggression, and leadership. These stories all circle back to the same uncomfortable truth. Baseball is not played by legends carved in stone. It's played by humans, flawed, impulsive, ambitious, sometimes reckless humans, and when their flaws spill into public view, they reshape the way we see not only them, but the sport itself. Maybe that's why controversy fascinates us, because it strips away the myth and leaves us with the reality that greatness and failure often live in the same person, and that the heroes we cheer for can be the villains we condemn in the very next inning. In the end, controversy doesn't erase the game's beauty, but it forces us to see that beauty through cracks, and perhaps that's a reminder we need, that baseball, like life, is not perfect. It's fragile, it's human, and maybe that's what makes it worth watching, not just for the home runs and strikeouts, but for the stories of the people who play it in all their brilliance and all their imperfection.